The morning Sarah Chan walked to her corner store in downtown Portland was the same morning humanity's greatest nightmare began. She moved slowly, her 73-year-old joints protesting each step, her worn canvas shopping bag clutched tightly in her weathered hands. The city buzzed around her with its usual energy, people rushing to work, cars honking, construction crews hammering away at yet another high-rise building. Sarah had lived through many changes in her lifetime. She remembered when this neighborhood was full of small family businesses, when people knew their neighbors, when children played in the streets without fear. Now everything moved so fast, everyone stared at glowing screens, and most folks seemed too busy to notice the old Chinese woman who had been walking these same streets for decades. But today would be different. Today would change everything. Dr. Marcus Williams sat in his laboratory at the Pacific Research Institute, 3 miles away from where Sarah was buying her weekly groceries. He stared at the computer screen, showing readings that made no sense. The seismic sensors had been picking up unusual vibrations for the past hour. Not earthquakes, but something else entirely. The patterns were too regular, too purposeful. "This can't be right," Marcus muttered, adjusting his thick glasses. He had spent 15 years studying geological phenomena, and nothing in his experience matched what he was seeing. The vibrations seemed to be coming from deep underground, moving in a straight line toward the city center. His phone rang, startling him from his thoughts. "Dr. Williams? This is General Patricia Hayes from the Defense Department. We need you to look at some data immediately." Marcus felt his stomach drop. When the military called scientists on a Tuesday morning, it was never good news. Meanwhile, in the underground tunnels beneath Portland, something ancient was stirring. It had been sleeping for thousands of years, buried so deep that human civilization had grown and flourished above it without ever knowing of its existence. But human activities, the constant drilling, the mining, the underground construction, had finally disturbed its slumber. The creature that awakened was unlike anything that had ever existed on Earth's surface. It stood 20 feet tall when fully extended, its body a horrifying fusion of organic tissue and metallic components that seemed to shift and change like living liquid. Multiple arms emerged from its torso, each ending in claws that could slice through steel as easily as paper. Its head was a nightmare of sensors and mandibles designed for one purpose: hunting and destroying any life form it encountered. But most terrifying of all was its intelligence. This was not some mindless beast. The apex terror, as military scientists would later name it, possessed a calculating, predatory mind that could analyze threats, adapt to weapons, and learn from every encounter. It had been the ultimate predator of its time, and now it was awake in a world full of new prey. The first sign of trouble came at 10:30 a.m. when construction worker Pete Rodriguez was operating a drill in the subway tunnel expansion project. He felt the machine hit something that wasn't rock or soil, something that seemed to push back. "Hey, Frank," Pete called to his supervisor. "This drill just hit something weird down here. Feels like metal, but it's warm." Frank Thompson walked over, his hard hat askew and his coffee still steaming in the underground chill. "Probably just hit an old pipe or something. City's got all kinds of junk buried down here from the old days." But as Pete pulled the drill bit out, a thick, dark liquid began seeping from the hole. It wasn't oil or water. It pulsed like blood, and it gave off a smell that made both men step backward in disgust. "That's not normal," Frank said, reaching for his radio. "Control, we've got some kind of leak down in Section 7. Sending up a sample for analysis." They never got the chance to send that sample anywhere. The ground beneath them began to shake, not like an earthquake, but like something massive was moving just below the surface. The dark liquid stopped seeping and started flowing, spreading across the tunnel floor in patterns that seemed almost purposeful. Then the screaming started. It came from further down the tunnel, where 3 other workers had been laying pipe. Pete and Frank looked at each other for a split second before Pete grabbed his emergency flashlight and ran toward the sound. What he saw in that tunnel would haunt his nightmares for the rest of his very short life. A hole had opened in the tunnel wall, perfectly round and smooth as if something had melted through the concrete and steel. Dark liquid covered the walls around it, and the three workers lay motionless on the ground. But they weren't just unconscious. Their bodies looked wrong, like something had drained them from the inside out. And from that hole came a sound that no human ear was meant to hear. A low, thrumming vibration that seemed to bypass the ears entirely and resonate in Pete's bones. "Frank!" Pete screamed, backing away from the hole. "Frank, we need to get out of here right now." But when he turned around, Frank was gone. The tunnel behind him stretched empty and dark, filled only with the echo of Pete's own panicked breathing. That's when Pete saw the eyes. They emerged from the hole first. Not eyes like any earthly creature, but sensors that glowed with an inner light and tracked his movement with predatory focus. Then came the arms, multiple appendages that seemed to flow like liquid metal but gripped the tunnel walls with impossible strength. Pete ran. He ran faster than he had ever run in his life, his work boots slipping on the smooth tunnel floor, his hard hat falling off and clattering behind him. He could hear the thing behind him, moving with a horrible scraping sound as its claws found purchase on concrete and steel. He reached the emergency ladder and climbed, his hands shaking so badly he could barely grip the rungs. Behind him, the sound grew louder, more urgent, as if the creature had sensed his escape attempt. Pete burst through the street-level maintenance cover just as the lunch crowd was beginning to fill the downtown sidewalks. He rolled onto the pavement, gasping and wild-eyed, trying to scream a warning that his terror-constricted throat couldn't form. The business people and tourists stepped around him, assuming he was just another street person having a bad day. A few pulled out phones to record what they thought might be an amusing video for social media. None of them noticed the maintenance cover beginning to buckle and warp as something incredibly strong pushed against it from below. Dr. Williams stared at his screen in disbelief. The seismic readings were now showing massive movement directly under downtown Portland, and the patterns were becoming more erratic, more aggressive. "General Hayes," he said into his phone, "whatever's down there, it's big, it's moving fast, and it's heading directly for the most populated area of the city." "How long do we have?" the general asked. Marcus ran the calculations in his head, factoring in the speed and direction of movement. Based on these readings, maybe 20 minutes before it reaches the surface in the downtown core. There was silence on the other end of the line for a moment. Then, General Hayes spoke in the careful, measured tone that military personnel used when delivering very bad news. "Dr. Williams, I need you to understand something. What you're tracking down there, we've been monitoring similar signatures around the world for the past 6 months. Tokyo, London, Moscow, Sydney. In each case, the creatures reached the surface, and..." She paused. "The casualty rates were 100% in a 6-block radius." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. "Creatures? Plural? This is the 7th incident. And, Doctor, none of our conventional weapons have been effective. These things adapt to everything we throw at them." As if summoned by their conversation, the first apex terror burst through the pavement at the intersection of 5th and Morrison, just 2 blocks from where Sarah Chan was finishing her grocery shopping. The creature emerged like a dark fountain, its liquid metal body flowing upward and then solidifying into its full, terrifying form. Cars screeched to a halt, drivers staring in shock at something their minds couldn't quite process. For a moment, everything was perfectly still. The apex terror stood in the middle of the intersection, its sensor eyes scanning the frozen humans around it, analyzing threats, cataloging prey. Then it moved. The attack was swift and methodical. The creature's multiple arms lashed out simultaneously, striking vehicles and sending them flying through storefront windows. Its claws sliced through metal and glass like they were paper, and wherever its dark liquid touched human skin, people simply collapsed. Panic erupted across downtown Portland. People ran in every direction, screaming, trampling each other in their desperation to escape. Car alarms wailed. Emergency sirens began their urgent chorus, and the orderly Tuesday morning dissolved into chaos. The apex terror seemed to feed on the panic. It moved through the fleeing crowds with horrible efficiency, its form constantly shifting and adapting. When someone tried to fight back with a tire iron, the creature's hide hardened to deflect the blow. When others tried to escape in cars, it moved faster, cutting off their routes with precision timing. Sarah Chun heard the commotion from inside the corner store, where she had been carefully counting out exact change for her groceries. Mrs. Patterson, the store owner, was staring out the window with wide eyes. "What in heaven's name is going on out there?" Mrs. Patterson asked. Sarah moved to the window and looked out at the chaos in the street. She saw people running, screaming, falling. She saw cars overturned and windows shattered. And, moving through it all, she saw something that her rational mind insisted couldn't exist. But Sarah Chun had lived through things that couldn't exist before. She had been a child during the Japanese occupation of her hometown in China. She had seen war, famine, and human cruelty beyond imagination. She had lost her parents, her brothers, everything she had ever known, and somehow found the strength to build a new life in a foreign country. So when she looked at the impossible creature terrorizing her adopted hometown, Sarah didn't freeze in disbelief like so many others. Instead, she did what she had always done in times of crisis. She paid attention. She watched how the creature moved, how it attacked, how it responded to the people around it. She noticed that it seemed to target the strongest and most aggressive people first, while moving past those who cowered or played dead. She observed that its liquid form hardened when struck, but became fluid again when moving rapidly. Most importantly, she noticed something that everyone else was too panicked to see. The creature was bleeding. Not blood as humans understood it, but dark liquid was definitely leaking from several points on its body where it had scraped against sharp debris. Whatever this thing was, it could be damaged. "Mrs. Patterson," Sarah said quietly, never taking her eyes off the creature, "do you still keep your late husband's hunting rifle in the back room?" Mrs. Patterson stared at the elderly Chinese woman as if she had lost her mind. "Sarah, that thing just picked up a car and threw it through the bank window. What do you think you're going to do with an old hunting rifle?" Sarah continued watching the creature's movements, her analytical mind cataloging every detail. "I'm going to find out what happens when you shoot it in the right place," she said calmly. Outside, the apex terror had cleared a 6-block area of all human life. Bodies lay scattered throughout the intersection, not dead but drained, their life force somehow absorbed by the creature. Cars sat abandoned, their doors hanging open where panicked drivers had fled on foot. The creature stood in the center of its devastation, sensors sweeping the area for any remaining prey. It had learned much about these new humans in its first few minutes of awakening. They were weak, slow, and poorly adapted for survival. This would be easier than it had expected. But as it prepared to move to the next area of the city, something made it pause. From the corner store, an elderly human was emerging. Unlike all the others, this one moved slowly and deliberately, showing no signs of panic or fear. The creature's sensors focused on this anomaly, trying to understand why this prey was behaving differently. Sarah Chun walked into the street, Mrs. Patterson's old hunting rifle held confidently in her weathered hands. She had checked the weapon carefully before leaving the store. It was old, but well-maintained, with 3 rounds in the chamber. The apex terror turned its full attention to her, its multiple arms spreading wide in an intimidation display that had terrified countless species across millennia. It emitted the bone-deep vibration that had paralyzed every other human it had encountered. Sarah felt the fear, felt her bones resonate with that alien sound. But she had felt fear before, had faced it, and survived it. Fear was just another piece of information to be processed and overcome. She raised the rifle and took careful aim, not at the creature's center mass where its hide appeared thickest, but at the joint where one of its arms connected to its torso, a place where she had observed the dark liquid seeping out. "Let's see how unstoppable you really are," she said quietly, and pulled the trigger. The rifle shot echoed through the empty streets like thunder, followed by a sound no human had ever heard before, the apex terror screaming. The bullet struck exactly where Sarah had aimed, penetrating the joint where dark liquid had been seeping. Instead of the metallic clang everyone expected, there was a wet, tearing sound, and the creature's left arm separated from its body in a spray of black fluid. The apex terror staggered backward, its remaining arms thrashing wildly as it processed this impossible development. In 6 previous cities, across thousands of encounters, nothing had been able to cause it significant damage. Human weapons had been absorbed, deflected, or simply ignored. Yet this small, elderly human had found a weakness that military specialists around the world had missed. Sarah didn't waste time celebrating. She had wounded the creature, but she could see it was already adapting. The dark liquid was flowing toward the injury, beginning to seal the wound and possibly regenerate the lost limb. She worked the bolt action on the rifle, chambering her second round. The apex terror's sensor eyes locked onto her with new intensity. This was no longer prey. This was a threat that required immediate elimination. The creature abandoned its methodical hunting behavior and lunged directly at Sarah with frightening speed. But Sarah had expected this. She had watched how the creature moved when attacking, had noted the slight delay as its liquid form transitioned to solid for maximum impact. She dove to her right, rolling behind an overturned car as razor-sharp claws whistled through the air where she had been standing. From her cover, Sarah could hear the creature moving, its claws scraping against asphalt as it searched for her. She knew she had perhaps seconds before it found her hiding spot and tore through the car like tissue paper. Dr. Williams was watching everything through emergency traffic cameras that were still functioning in the area. From his laboratory, he had a bird's-eye view of something that should have been impossible: a single civilian engaging an apex terror in direct combat and actually causing it damage. "General Hayes," he said into his phone, his voice tight with excitement and disbelief, "you need to see this. Someone downtown just wounded the creature." "That's impossible," General Hayes replied. "Our best weapons haven't even scratched the ones in other cities. I'm sending you the feed right now. It's an elderly woman with what looks like a hunting rifle. She hit it in a joint, and one of its arms came completely off." On the other end of the line, Marcus could hear rapid typing and multiple voices as the general shared the footage with her team. "Doctor, this could be the breakthrough we've been looking for. Can you maintain contact with the civilian?" Marcus looked at his screens, showing Sarah crouched behind the overturned car while the apex terror stalked closer. "I could try, but, General, I don't think she's going to survive long enough for us to help her." Sarah pressed herself against the car's undercarriage, trying to make herself as small as possible. She could hear the creature moving closer, its breathing, if that's what it was, like the hiss of hydraulic machinery, mixed with something organic and wet. Through the car's shattered windows, she caught glimpses of its form as it prowled around her hiding spot. The wounded area was already partially healed, but she noticed that the regenerated tissue looked different, more organic, less metallic. Whatever process the creature used to repair itself was imperfect under stress. The apex terror stopped directly above her hiding spot. Sarah held her breath, knowing that one wrong sound would bring those terrible claws down through the car's roof. In the silence, she could hear something unexpected: emergency sirens in the distance, growing louder. The creature heard them too. Its head snapped up, sensor eyes focusing on the approaching vehicles. Sarah realized this might be her only chance for a better shot while it was distracted. She rolled out from under the car on the side opposite the creature, coming up in a kneeling position with the rifle already raised. The apex terror was still looking toward the sirens when Sarah fired her second shot. This time she aimed for the joint where the creature's right leg connected to its torso. The bullet struck home, and the creature toppled sideways as its leg buckled. More of the dark liquid sprayed across the pavement, and The apex terror scream was even louder than before. But Sarah's position was now exposed, and the creature's fall brought it closer to her rather than farther away. One of its remaining arms lashed out, claws extended, moving faster than any living thing should be able to move. The claws caught Sarah across her left shoulder, tearing through her coat and into the flesh beneath. The pain was immediate and intense, but what followed was worse. A strange numbness began spreading from the wound, as if the creature's claws carried some kind of toxin. Sarah stumbled backward, fighting to maintain her grip on the rifle as her left arm went completely numb. She could feel warmth spreading down her side, blood, probably a lot of it. But she was still alive, still conscious, still able to fight. The apex terror was struggling to rise, its damaged leg unable to support its full weight. Dark liquid continued to flow from both wounds, pooling on the asphalt around it. Sarah could see that the creature was weakening, but she was weakening faster. She had one bullet left. The emergency vehicles that had attracted the creature's attention burst into the intersection. 3 police cars, 2 fire trucks, and an ambulance. The first responders had been expecting a terrorist attack or maybe a gas explosion. What they found instead was a nightmare scenario that their training had never prepared them for. Officer Jenny Martinez was first out of her patrol car, service weapon drawn. She took one look at the scene, the massive creature struggling to stand, the elderly woman bleeding heavily while still somehow pointing a hunting rifle at it, the scattered bodies throughout the intersection, and her police academy training completely abandoned her. "When the hell is that thing?" she whispered. Her partner, Officer Dave Kim, was already on his radio. "Dispatch, we need immediate backup at 5th and Morrison. I don't know what we have. Some kind of large animal attack. Multiple casualties. Requesting hazmat team and animal control." The dispatcher's voice crackled back. "Animal control? Officer Kim, can you be more specific about the nature of the animal?" Dave looked at the apex terror, which had managed to prop itself up on its remaining arms and was turning its attention toward the new arrivals. "Negative, dispatch. I have no idea what this thing is." The creature's sensor eyes locked onto the cluster of emergency vehicles. Fresh prey, multiple targets, and these ones carried weapons. The apex terror began pulling itself toward them, its damaged leg dragging uselessly behind it, but its remaining limbs more than capable of propelling it forward. Sarah saw the creature moving toward the first responders and felt a surge of desperate energy. These people had come to help, not knowing what they were walking into. She couldn't let the creature reach them in their current confused state. "Get back," she shouted to the police officers. "Get everyone back. Your guns won't stop it." Officer Martinez looked at the blood-soaked elderly woman shouting warnings and made a decision that probably saved her life. Instead of advancing on the creature, she began herding the other first responders back toward their vehicles. "Fall back," she called. "Everyone fall back now." But the apex terror was moving faster now, sensing that its prey might escape. It abandoned any pretense of stealth and charged directly at the emergency vehicles, its multiple arms spread wide to catch as many humans as possible. Sarah knew she had one chance. The creature was moving in a straight line toward the first responders, completely focused on them and paying no attention to her. Its regenerated leg was still weak, and the strain of its charge was causing more dark liquid to seep from its wounds. She raised the rifle, ignoring the screaming pain in her shoulder, and aimed for the creature's head. Not the heavily armored sensor array, but the junction where its neck connected to its torso. Another joint, another potential weakness. The rifle kicked against her shoulder as she fired her last bullet. The shot was true, striking the creature at the base of its head just as it reached the first emergency vehicle. The apex terror's charge became a tumble as its entire nervous system was disrupted. It crashed into Officer Martinez's patrol car, crushing the front end, but missing the officer herself by inches. Dark liquid fountained from the new wound, far more than from the previous injuries. For a moment, everything was still. The creature lay motionless against the ruined patrol car, its form already beginning to lose cohesion as the dark liquid spread in growing pools around it. Sarah lowered the empty rifle and allowed herself a moment of hope. Then, the apex terror began to laugh. It wasn't a human laugh. It was a sound like metal grinding against stone, like machinery breaking down in a musical pattern. But it was unmistakably laughter, and it was directed at Sarah. The creature pulled itself upright, using the patrol car for support. The wounds she had inflicted were still there, still leaking, but they no longer seemed to matter. The apex terror had learned something from their encounter, had adapted in a way that went beyond physical regeneration. "Clever little prey," it said. The words came from somewhere deep within its form, not quite speech, but definitely communication. This was the first time any apex terror had been recorded speaking, and the first responders stared in shock at the impossible sight of a monster having a conversation. "You found our weak points. You caused us pain. But pain teaches us. Pain makes us stronger." The creature's voice was like rocks falling down a metal chute, harsh and grating but clearly understandable. Sarah felt her heart sink. She had no ammunition left, no weapons, and her shoulder wound was making her lightheaded from blood loss. Around her, the first responders were still paralyzed by the shock of hearing the creature speak. But she refused to show fear. If these were to be her last moments, she would face them with the same dignity she had shown throughout her life. "If you're so strong," she called back to the creature, "why are you still bleeding?" The apex terror tilted its head, studying her with what might have been curiosity. "You are not like the others. The others run. The others scream. The others die quickly." It took a step closer, dark liquid still dripping from its wounds. "You think. You observe. You fight." Sarah gripped the empty rifle like a club, knowing it would be useless but unwilling to give up completely. "I've seen monsters before. Human ones. You're just bigger and uglier." This seemed to amuse the creature. "Human ones? Tell us about human monsters, little prey." Sarah thought about her childhood, about the soldiers who had burned her village, about the men who had killed her family for no reason other than conquest and cruelty. Human monsters kill because they choose to. They hurt people because it makes them feel powerful. They destroy beautiful things because they're too weak to create anything themselves. The apex terror considered this, its sensor eyes never leaving her face. "And what are we?" "You're just an animal," Sarah said quietly. "A predator following its nature. That doesn't make you evil, just dangerous." The creature was silent for a long moment. Around them, the first responders waited tensely, some beginning to edge toward better cover, others frozen in place by the surreal nature of the conversation. Finally, the apex terror spoke again. "You are correct. We are predators. We kill because it is our nature, not because we choose to. But this makes us more dangerous, not less." It raised one of its remaining arms, claws extended towards Sarah. "You have taught us much, small prey. You have shown us that your species can be formidable when cornered. We will remember this when we hunt the others of your kind." Sarah closed her eyes, preparing for the end. But instead of claws, she heard the sound of metal being torn apart. When she opened her eyes, the apex terror was pulling a steel beam from one of the damaged vehicles. It hefted the improvised weapon, experimentally testing its weight and balance. "You've fought us with intelligence and tools," the creature said. "We will honor your resistance by doing the same." The steel beam came down towards Sarah's head with crushing force. She raised the empty rifle in a futile attempt to block the blow, knowing it would only delay the inevitable by milliseconds. The beam struck the rifle and drove it down toward her skull. And stopped. Officer Martinez had tackled Sarah from behind, driving both women to the ground as the steel beam whistled through the air where Sarah's head had been a moment before. "Stay down," Martinez shouted, drawing her service weapon and opening fire on the apex terror. The bullets struck the creature's hardened hide and bounced off harmlessly, but they distracted it long enough for Martinez to pull Sarah behind another overturned car. "Ma'am, are you okay?" Martinez asked, checking Sarah's wounded shoulder. Sarah managed a weak smile. I've been better, but thank you, officer. Martinez. Jenny Martinez. And, lady, I don't know what you did to that thing, but you've got it bleeding pretty good. Our backup should be here soon with heavier weapons. Sarah shook her head. Your heavy weapons won't work any better than your handguns. It adapts to whatever you throw at it. Then how we stop it? Sarah looked at the spreading pools of dark liquid around the intersection, at the creature's obvious fatigue, despite its bravado, at the way it was favoring its remaining limbs to compensate for the damaged ones. We don't stop it, she said quietly. We outlast it. Officer Martinez stared at Sarah in disbelief. Outlast it? Ma'am, that thing just picked up a steel beam like it was a baseball bat. How exactly are we supposed to outlast something like that? Sarah pressed her hand against her wounded shoulder, trying to slow the bleeding while her mind worked through the problem. Look at it carefully, Officer Martinez. Really look at it. Jenny peered around the edge of their makeshift cover. The apex terror was standing in the middle of the intersection, still holding the steel beam, but no longer actively hunting. Instead, it seemed to be scanning the area methodically, its sensor eyes sweeping back and forth in a pattern that suggested it was conserving energy. I see a 20-foot-tall nightmare that's been shot 3 times and is still standing, Martinez said. Look at the ground around it, Sarah insisted. Martinez looked again, and this time she saw what Sarah meant. The dark liquid that had been leaking from the creature's wounds was spreading across a much larger area than it should have been. The pools were growing, flowing together, and the creature itself seemed to be standing in a slightly different position than it had been moments before. Is it shrinking? Martinez asked. Not shrinking, Sarah corrected. Bleeding out. That dark liquid isn't just blood. It's part of its actual body mass. Every drop it loses makes it weaker. As if responding to their conversation, the apex terror suddenly staggered slightly, catching itself with the steel beam. The motion was subtle, but both women caught it. Dr. Williams was monitoring the situation from his laboratory, coordinating with military units that were racing toward downtown Portland from 3 different bases. Through the traffic cameras, he could see that Sarah Chun and Officer Martinez were alive and apparently strategizing, while the apex terror appeared to be in some kind of waiting mode. General Hayes, he reported, the creature's behavior has changed significantly. It's no longer actively hunting, and its energy signature is decreasing. Decreasing how? The general asked. Hard to quantify exactly, but if I had to guess, I'd say it's lost about 15% of its total mass since the engagement began. The civilian was right. The creature can be wounded, and those wounds are taking a toll. General Hayes was quiet for a moment, processing this information. Doctor, what's your assessment of the civilian's chances if she continues to engage? Marcus looked at the blood trail visible on his camera feeds, at Sarah's obvious injuries and exhaustion. Honestly, very poor. She's lost a significant amount of blood. She's out of ammunition, and she's a 73-year-old woman facing a creature that could still kill dozens of people even in its weakened state. But she's the only person who's managed to hurt it. Yes, and if our military units get there before the situation resolves itself, they need to know exactly what she did to cause damage. The general was already ahead of him. I'm sending in a tactical team with precise instructions based on the civilian's successful tactics. ETA 12 minutes. General, Marcus said carefully, 12 minutes might be too long. On the ground, Sarah was thinking the same thing. Her shoulder was throbbing with each heartbeat, and she could feel her strength ebbing with each drop of blood she lost. Officer Martinez was young and brave, but her service weapon would be useless against the apex terror, and backup was still minutes away. The creature, meanwhile, was beginning to move again. It had apparently finished whatever assessment it had been conducting and was now advancing toward their hiding spot with renewed purpose. Officer Martinez, Sarah said quietly, I need you to do exactly what I tell you when I tell you to do it. Can you do that? Ma'am, I'm trained to protect civilians, not take orders from them. I know, but Right now, I'm the only person in this city who understands how that thing thinks and fights. If you want to save the people in those emergency vehicles behind us, you need to trust me." Martinez looked at the other first responders, who were still huddled behind their vehicles, radios crackling with confused reports and requests for guidance that nobody could provide. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. Sarah pointed to a fire axe that had fallen from one of the damaged fire trucks. "When I give you the signal, I want you to grab that axe and attack the creature from behind. Aim for the same spots I hit with the rifle, the joints where its limbs connect to its body." "Ma'am, with respect, you had a rifle and you still barely hurt it. How is an axe going to be better?" "Because," Sarah said, struggling to her feet despite the pain, "this time it's going to be distracted." Before Martinez could ask what she meant, Sarah walked out from behind their cover, directly into the open intersection where the apex terror could see her clearly. The creature stopped its advance immediately, its sensor eyes focusing on this unexpected development. The small prey that had wounded, it was presenting herself voluntarily, without weapons, bleeding heavily from injuries it had inflicted. "You again," the apex terror said in its grinding, mechanical voice. "You're wounded. You are weak. You have no weapons. Why do you not run?" Sarah stopped about 15 feet away from the creature, just out of range of its claws, but close enough that it could reach her in one quick lunge. "Because I'm tired of running. I've been running from monsters my whole life." The creature tilted its massive head, studying her. "You wish to die standing rather than fleeing?" "I wish to understand you," Sarah said. "In all the places you've attacked, in all the cities you've destroyed, has anyone ever tried to talk to you?" This question seemed to genuinely puzzle the apex terror. It lowered the steel beam slightly, its hostile posture relaxing just a fraction. "Talk. Prey does not talk to predators." "I'm not just prey," Sarah said. "I'm a grandmother. I've raised children, taught them to walk and speak and think. I've built a life, created things, made the world a little bit better than I found it." Behind the creature, Officer Martinez was moving carefully toward the fallen axe, using Sarah's conversation to mask the sound of her movement. "You create?" the apex terror asked. "Explain this concept." Sarah thought of her granddaughter, Amy, who lived in California and called her every Sunday. She thought of the small garden she maintained behind her apartment building, where she grew vegetables for her elderly neighbors. She thought of the ESL classes she taught at the community center, helping new immigrants learn to navigate their new home. "I've spent my life making things better for other people, teaching them, feeding them, caring for them when they were sick or scared. That's what humans do. We take care of each other." The creature was silent for a long moment. "This caring, it serves no survival purpose." "It serves the most important survival purpose of all," Sarah said. "It ensures that something good continues after we're gone." Officer Martinez had reached the axe. She lifted it carefully, testing its weight, positioning herself for a clear strike at the creature's damaged leg joint. The apex terror seemed to be wrestling with concepts that had no place in its predatory worldview. If you create and care and ensure continuation, why are you here facing death? Why not flee to preserve your goodness? Sarah smiled sadly. Because someone has to stand between monsters and the people they want to hurt. Someone has to be willing to pay the price to protect what's worth protecting. For the first time since emerging from its underground prison, the apex terror appeared uncertain. "You would die for creatures that are not your offspring? For strangers? I would die for the chance that my granddaughter might grow up in a world where monsters like you don't exist." The creature raised the steel beam again, but its movement was slower, less certain. "You confuse us. You fight not for territory or resources or dominance. You fight for others." "I fight for the future," Sarah said simply. Behind the apex terror, Officer Martinez saw her moment. The creature was completely focused on Sarah, its damaged leg bearing its full weight, dark liquid still seeping from the joint where Sarah's second bullet had struck. Martinez charged forward, raising the fire axe above her head and bringing it down with all her strength at the exact spot Sarah had indicated. The axe blade bit deep into the creature's leg joint, much deeper than the bullets had penetrated. The apex terror screamed and spun around, lashing out with its claws at Officer Martinez. But the movement put too much stress on the damaged joint. There was a horrible tearing sound, and the creature's legs separated completely from its body. The apex terror crashed to the ground, dark liquid spraying everywhere. Martinez rolled away from the falling creature, clutching the fire axe. "Sarah, now would be a good time for whatever comes next in your plan." But Sarah was swaying on her feet, the blood loss finally catching up with her. I don't think I have a next part," she admitted. The apex terror was far from finished. Despite losing 2 limbs, it began pulling itself across the pavement towards Sarah with its remaining arms. Its speed was reduced, but its determination seemed undiminished. "You think you have one?" the creature gasped, its voice weaker but still menacing. "We are eternal. We have survived the death of stars. We will survive your small defiance." Sarah sank to her knees, no longer able to stand. Her vision was becoming blurry around the edges, and she could feel her heartbeat becoming irregular. But she kept her eyes fixed on the approaching creature. "Maybe," she said quietly, "but you'll remember us. You'll remember that some of your prey fought back. And maybe that will change how you hunt." The apex terror paused in its advance. "Change? We do not change. We are perfect predators. Perfect predators don't get wounded by grandmothers with hunting rifles," Sarah pointed out. The creature was silent, considering this. Around them, the intersection was eerily quiet except for the distant sound of approaching sirens and helicopters. The other first responders were maintaining their distance, following Officer Martinez's shouted instructions to stay back. "You believe," the apex terror said slowly, "that our encounter will alter our behavior?" "I believe," Sarah said, her voice growing weaker, "that any creature capable of learning is capable of growing. And you've already proven you can learn." The creature pulled itself closer until it was within arm's reach of where Sarah knelt. Up close, she could see that its wounds were not healing as quickly as they had before. The dark liquid was flowing more slowly, and the creature's form seemed less stable than when she had first encountered it. "What would you have us learn, small teacher?" the apex terror asked. Sarah looked into those alien sensor eyes and saw something she hadn't expected: curiosity. Not just predatory interest, but genuine desire to understand. "Learn that strength isn't just about being able to destroy things," she said. "Learn that the greatest power comes from being able to create, to protect, to nurture. Learn that the species that survive the longest aren't always the ones with the sharpest claws." The sound of military helicopters was growing louder. Soon this intersection would be flooded with soldiers and weapons, and the delicate moment of communication would be lost in violence and chaos. The apex terror seemed to realize this as well. "Your warriors come. They will attempt to destroy us with greater weapons than you possessed." "Yes," Sarah agreed. "And you'll probably defeat them because you're stronger and faster and better adapted for war than we are." "But," the creature prompted, sensing there was more. "But we'll keep fighting. Every time you destroy a city, someone else will figure out a new way to hurt you. Every time you think you've eliminated us, we'll find a way to survive and adapt and come back stronger." Sarah smiled weakly. "That's what humans do. We're very stubborn that way." The apex terror was quiet for a long time, its sensors focused on Sarah's face. When it finally spoke, its voice was different, less mechanical, more thoughtful. "You propose that we are engaged in a war that neither side can truly win. I propose that maybe it doesn't have to be a war at all." The creature's head tilted in that gesture that was becoming familiar. "Explain." Sarah could hear boots on pavement now. The military teams were deploying around the intersection, setting up firing positions, preparing for a battle that would probably destroy several city blocks. "You're predators," she said, "but you're also intelligent. You can choose your prey, choose your hunting grounds. What if—" She paused, struggling to stay conscious long enough to finish her thought. What if you hunted the real monsters instead? Real monsters? The humans who hurt other humans. The ones who start wars, who abuse children, who destroy the environment, who choose cruelty over kindness. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper now. Hunt them. Make the world better instead of just making it emptier. The apex terror stared at her for a long moment. Then, without warning, it placed one of its clawed hands very gently on Sarah's uninjured shoulder. You would turn us into instruments of justice rather than simple predators. I would turn you into partners instead of enemies. Around the intersection, military snipers were taking aim, waiting for the order to fire. Officer Martinez was crouched behind cover, still holding the bloody fire axe, watching this impossible conversation between a dying grandmother and an alien predator. The apex terror made its decision. Your proposal has merit, it said. We will consider it. The creature began to change, its solid form becoming liquid again. But instead of regenerating its missing limbs, it was flowing toward the storm drains that dotted the intersection. Wait, Sarah called weakly. If you go back underground, they'll just keep hunting you. They'll never stop being afraid of you. The apex terror paused in its retreat. What do you suggest? With the last of her strength, Sarah pulled out her cell phone and activated the video recording function. Talk to them. Tell them what you told me. Show them that you can choose to be something other than a monster. The creature flowed back into a more solid form, positioning itself where the phone's camera could capture both of them in the frame. People of Earth, the apex terror said in its grinding voice, this small human has taught us something we did not expect to learn. We came to your world as predators seeking prey. We found something more complex. Sarah held the phone steady despite her trembling hands. Around them, the military forces held their fire, apparently as transfixed by the scene as everyone watching the traffic cameras from around the world. We have learned that your species possesses courage, intelligence, and compassion. You fight not just for yourselves, but for each other. You create beauty and meaning in a universe that offers neither. You transform destruction into hope. The creature looked directly into the camera. We propose a new arrangement. We will remain on your world, but as protectors rather than destroyers. We will hunt only those among you who prey upon the innocent. We will use our strength to defend rather than demolish. Sarah managed a small smile. And in return? In return, we ask only that you remember this moment. Remember that even monsters can choose to become something better when given the chance. The apex terror began flowing toward the storm drains again, but more slowly this time. Farewell, small teacher. Your lessons will not be forgotten. As the creature disappeared into the underground tunnels, Sarah let the phone slip from her fingers. Officer Martinez was immediately at her side, applying pressure to her wounded shoulder and calling for paramedics. Ma'am, stay with me, Martinez urged. Help is coming. Sarah looked up at the young officer with gratitude. Jenny, make sure that video gets shared. Make sure people see it. I will, ma'am. But right now, you need to focus on staying alive. Sarah thought of her granddaughter Amy, who would probably be calling this Sunday, as usual. She thought of her garden, which would need tending soon. She thought of her ESL students, who were counting on her to help them build new lives in a foreign land. I think I have a few more years left in me, she said quietly. 3 hours later, Sarah Chin's video had been viewed over 1 million times. Military forces around the world reported that all apex terror attacks had ceased immediately after the Portland incident. Several governments were already forming task forces to study the implications of the creature's offer. Dr. Williams found himself reassigned from geological research to xenobiology, tasked with developing protocols for human apex terror cooperation. General Hayes was promoted and put in charge of a new department dedicated to monitoring and coordinating with humanity's unexpected new allies. Officer Jenny Martinez was awarded the Medal of Valor and found herself inundated with interview requests from news organizations around the world. She declined them all, preferring to return to her regular patrol duties and the familiar rhythms of community policing. And in a hospital room overlooking downtown Portland, Sarah Chun was visited by more people in 1 week than she had seen in the previous year. Government officials, scientists, journalists, and ordinary citizens all wanted to meet the grandmother who had changed the course of human history with nothing more than an old hunting rifle and a willingness to listen. But the visitor that mattered most to her was her granddaughter Amy, who flew up from California as soon as she heard the news. "Grandma," Amy said, holding Sarah's hand as they looked out the window at the intersection where everything had changed. "When I was little, you used to tell me stories about brave people who stood up to monsters. I never thought you were talking about yourself." Sarah squeezed her granddaughter's hand. "The best stories," she said, "are the ones where the monster decides to stop being a monster. Those are the stories worth telling." Outside their window, construction crews were already working to repair the damage from the battle. But scattered throughout the intersection, growing in the cracks where dark liquid had spilled, small green plants were beginning to sprout, a reminder that even in the aftermath of destruction, new life could take root and grow. In the months that followed, apex terror sightings became increasingly common around the world. But instead of bringing death and destruction, they brought protection to those who needed it most. Human trafficking rings found their operations disrupted by creatures that could move through any terrain. Corrupt officials discovered that hiding behind armed guards offered no protection from predators that could phase through walls. Environmental polluters learned that there were consequences for poisoning the planet that extended beyond government regulations. The creatures kept their word, hunting only those humans who preyed upon others. And gradually, the world began to change in ways that no one could have predicted. Crime rates plummeted in major cities. International conflict became harder to sustain when war criminals found themselves facing an enemy that could not be bought, threatened, or reasoned with. Environmental protection became a matter of survival rather than politics when dumping toxins into rivers or clear-cutting forests attracted the attention of 20-foot-tall alien predators. It wasn't a perfect world. No world ever could be. But it was a world where monsters had chosen to become guardians, where an elderly grandmother's compassion had transformed terror into hope, and where the future suddenly seemed brighter than anyone had dared to imagine. Sarah Chun returned to her quiet life, tending her garden, teaching her classes, and calling her granddaughter every Sunday. But sometimes, late at night, she would see a familiar shadow moving through the alleyways of her neighborhood, and she would smile knowing that someone was watching over the city she loved. The age of the apex terror was over. The age of the apex guardian had begun, and it all started with an old woman who refused to run.